Welcome to this analysis of the Union Budget 2022. Let us start with the simple meaning of the word budget. We don't have to look beyond the dictionary for the meaning of this word. A budget is an estimate of income and expenditure for a specified period of time. That's all it is. In other words, by definition, a budget must be boring. But then why is it that in India, a budget is such a fanciful, glamorous event? It is because over the years, the whole central role of the budget has been perverted to make it some kind of a launch pad for new policy announcements on the fiscal and economic front. Also, many governments have at various times come out with populist measures and other changes in the tax and economic laws because elections are around the corner, or to give sops to certain sections of society. So this is why Indian budgets are looked forward to with such fear and also excitement. Now, the late industrialist Aditya Vikram Birla, he said, "I do business in 6 countries, but it is only in India that I have to worry about the budget. In most of the other advanced countries, a budget is an exercise which sticks very closely to its definition, its dictionary definition." When we look at the budget, therefore, let us first examine government finances, because that is what the budget is all about. And when we look at government finances, there are 2 important measures of the economy. And those measures are, 1, the gross domestic product, or GDP, and 2, the gross fiscal deficit, or the GFD, or simply the fiscal deficit. So let's take the gross domestic product, and a very simple and easily comprehensible definition is that the gross domestic product is the total market value of finished goods and services produced in the country in a given year, plus the income of local residents from investments made abroad, minus the income earned by foreigners from the domestic market. A pretty simple concept to understand. The first bullet point there is the most important. The total market value of finished goods and services produced in the country in a given year. And then, if you're sitting in India, but you're making investments outside India, which you can do today, that income is also to be included. And similarly, there is the reverse investment. Foreigners may make investments in India, and when they make profits, when they earn income, they will seek to repatriate those profits outside India, so that has to be deducted. This is all it is. Now let's look at the GDP in numbers. This is the figure of gross domestic products as per the revised estimates of 2021-22. Mind you, the financial year 2021-22 is not over, but we have the revised estimates that are out and published in the budget, and that is a very, very large number, 2,32,14,703 crores. That's the size of the GDP as per the revised estimates in 2021-22. But apart from being a large figure, it is largely meaningless. If we want to look at the GDP and learn something from it, we should do it in 3 phases. First, look at the GDP numbers for the last few years, and then come to the year that went before the previous one, and the current one. So first let's look at 4 years from 2016-17 to 2019-20. These were 4 years where the COVID-19 crisis had not yet impacted the economy. In fact, the crisis broke at the fag end of the financial year 2019-20. Now, even before COVID, what these figures are telling us, that is the growth rate, the GDP growth rate in percentage, what these figures are telling us is that long before COVID, the Indian economy was in trouble, was in decline. As you can see there, 8.37, 6.1, 4.2, and then you have the financial year 2020-21, where we have a minus appearing for the first time before that figure of 7.7%. The Indian economy actually contracted. It did not expand, it contracted. This is an economic catastrophe. Of course, this is something that was caused by the pandemic, which itself is a black swan event. But from there, a little good news. From that low base rate, when we come to 2021-22, the estimated growth rate in GDP, as was announced by the finance minister, is 9.2%. And we hope that if not this high figure, at least something like 7 or 8% will continue in the next financial year of 2022-23, so that the economy can once again start working and once again start growing in a meaningful manner. Now we come to the fiscal deficit. And the fiscal deficit is simply the extent to which the government has to borrow to meet its expenditure after it has exhausted its income stream. When all the income streams of the government are insufficient to meet its expenditure, it resorts to massive borrowing, as we shall shortly see. And this is the fiscal deficit. And the fiscal deficit is always expressed as a percentage of GDP. When you have a vibrant economy, growing GDP, yes, the fiscal deficit, it's easy to manage within reasonable means, within prudent means. Now, speaking of prudence, what is the ideal fiscal deficit? Most economists agree that for India at least, the fiscal deficit must be equal to or less than 3% of the GDP. So keeping this figure of 3% at the back of our minds, let's examine the actual fiscal deficit in the last couple of years. In financial year 2020-21, the actual fiscal deficit was, once again, that number there may not be very important, but it was 9.2% of GDP. This shows you the terrible effect of the COVID pandemic. When the budget of last year was presented, that is in February of 2021, when the budget was presented, BE means budget estimates, and the budget estimated that from that terrible figure of 9.2%, in the next financial year, 2021-22, we will be able to control the fiscal deficit and lower it to 6.8% of GDP. This was only the estimate. Now, about 10 or 11 months of the new financial year are passed, and we have the revised estimates for 2021-22. And the good news is that we have remained very close to the targeted figure. 6.8% was targeted, but the revised estimates tell us we are likely to have a fiscal deficit in 2021-22 of 6.9%. 0.1% missing the target is not a big deal. Now, what about this year's budget? Estimating for the financial year that is to come, that is of 2022-23. The finance minister has set a modest lowering from the current revised estimates of 6.9% to 6.4% of GDP. And I sincerely hope that we are able to achieve it, perhaps if we are lucky, surpass it a little bit. Of course, both 2020-21 and 2021-22 were financial years in which the Indian economy was badly affected by the COVID pandemic. Now, when we look at both the GDP numbers and the fiscal deficit numbers, we should be cautiously optimistic that the Indian economy is resilient, that it is showing signs of bouncing back. The gross tax receipts and total expenditure figures in the budget are suspect. If the government's figures of gross tax receipts are to be believed, tax buoyancy will be less than 1. What is this tax buoyancy? Tax buoyancy is nothing but the percentage increase in tax revenues divided by the percentage increase in GDP. We can understand this by a very simple example. If in a given year, tax revenues increase by 12%, the government's tax collections increase by 12%, when GDP increases by 8% in the same year, the tax buoyancy is 12 divided by 8, 1.5. That means in this particular economy, when you have a rise in GDP, taxes rise by more than the percentage rise in GDP. That's what tax buoyancy is. Now, in this year's budget, the government's own figures of gross tax receipts, when you look at them, and when you see their projections for the GDP for the coming year, we find that the tax buoyancy is less than 1. But this is going against the grain, because in India, tax buoyancy has always been greater than 1. So there's something wrong, something mysterious there about the government's figures. Maybe the government is only trying to be very, very conservative, which is not a bad thing. Similarly, total expenditure figures are projected to increase by just 4%. Are we to believe that adjusted for inflation, there will be no real increase in government expenditure in financial year 2022-23? When you're talking about just a rise of 4%, if inflation is going to be more than 4%, that means the government's expenditure is actually going to come down. This is simply unimaginable, because one particular occurrence alone can skew the whole picture. Net borrowings. The government is going to be a huge borrower in the Indian debt markets in the coming year, because net borrowings are going to increase by a whopping 44%. From 7.75 lakh crores to 11.2 lakh crores. This is going to be the government's borrowing program. And this particular cartoon from, of course, one of the United States websites, but very, very relevant to India. Just as we are destroying the environment and leaving a much worse world for future generations, we are also destroying the financial environment by taking up too much of debt at the government level and destroying the financial environment too, because it will be future generations that will have to pick up the bill for the government's carelessness and profligacy at the moment. What could be one possible unpleasant fallout of this kind of massive borrowing by the government? The government's massive borrowing program is likely to crowd out the private sector, even though the finance minister spoke about crowding in private sector investment in a budget speech. What is crowding out? There is a limited pool of money. Now, for this pool of money, when the government has a massive borrowing program, the government will be borrowing from the markets. The private sector will also be fighting for the same pool of money, for its share at least. But as you can very well imagine, in this tussle, the private sector, individuals, businesses, even large businesses, can never win against the government. So the result will be that private sector enterprises will get the money but they will have to pay higher and higher rates of interest. So the bad news for financial year 2022-23 is that finance costs are bound to rise both for the government as well as for other borrowers. This is a worrying fact. So businesses will have to be very careful about debt, very careful about expansion programs that are going to be funded by debt. Businesses will have to look at other modes of funding like equity to grow their businesses. One of the ways that the government can shore up its finances, at least in India, is by disinvestment. Unfortunately, the history of disinvestment in India has been a disaster. And the story of Air India will very easily elucidate that. We had this airline, a private sector airline, run by the Tatas. Everything was going fine. It would have probably grown organically as an airline and made its mark in the world. But in 1953, in an act of exceptional stupidity even for the government of India, Air India was snatched from the Tatas. In 2022, 69 years later, and after burning tens of thousands of crores of taxpayer money along the way, Air India was returned to the Tatas. This is what was taken from the Tatas. This is what was returned to the Tatas. And this is the poor guy who paid the bill, the taxpayer. In this budget, in a final and cruel cut, Budget 2022 has allocated rupees 52,000 crores to clear Air India's dues, because the Tatas are not going to clear those kind of dues. It's the taxpayer who is going to clear. And if you think that this is the only tragedy, no, there are many such tragedies lurking in the government. Many areas, many enterprises where the government has no business to be in those businesses, but is still clinging on to them. I'll give you just one other example. BSNL, in this very budget, 47,000 crores have been allotted to BSNL to help it tide over its numerous crises, including financial crises. So between Air India and BSNL, you have almost 100,000 crores. That's not small money. Almost 100,000 crores allotted to these two white elephants, which under the government have only suffered, done badly, not been able to face up to competition. This is, of course, in lighter vein, my favorite BSNL cartoon. Let's examine disinvestment a little more. When last year's budget, that is Budget 2021, was announced, the government set a fanciful target of 1,75,000 crores for disinvestment receipts in financial year 2021-22. When we read this figure, we were shocked because nothing close to this figure had ever been achieved in any of the previous years. So either the government had to be exceptionally serious about disinvestment, or the government was just plucking a figure out of its hat. History has shown that this was nothing but a work of fiction, because in the first 10 months of this financial year, that's until January 2022, against the target of 1,75,000 crores, only rupees 12,100 crores has actually been collected from disinvestment. Which means this figure was so wrong as to be laughable. And the government itself has revised this estimate, and the revised estimate for 2021-22 is 78,000 crores. From 1,75,000 crores, we are revising the figure now to 78,000 crores. We have actually collected only 12,000 crores. How are we expecting to bridge this 66,000 crores in just the next month or two? Because that is all that is left. of this financial year. I think the government is relying entirely upon the initial public offer of the Life Insurance Corporation of India, which is due to come out very shortly. Budget 2022 disinvestment proceeds estimate for financial year 2022-23 is 65,000 crores. So look at the difference between the estimates in the two budget. Budget 2021 had estimated 1,75,000 crores, but budget 2022 for the next financial year, much more modest 65,000 crores. Clearly, the government is absolutely incapable of ever estimating disinvestment proceeds and proceeding with a meaningful, serious program of disinvestment. Let's look at subsidies. Subsidies of food, fertilizers, and petrol have been cut. Food subsidy cut from 2.86 lakh crores to 2.06 lakh crores. This is an enormous cut. Fertilizer, once again, quite a big cut, 1.4 lakh crores to 1.05 lakh crores. And petroleum subsidy from 6,500 crores to 5,800 crores. When you look at these figures, this is one good thing that has happened in this budget, at least from the point of view of pure economics. Subsidies can be of two types. The moment somebody talks of cutting subsidies, people say you are anti-poor. No, there are two types of subsidies. One is targeted subsidies, the other is non-targeted subsidies. And what we have seen in this budget is a move away from non-targeted subsidies. Now, what are non-targeted subsidies? Take the subsidy on petrol. If Mukesh Ambani is filling petrol into his newly purchased Rolls-Royce Cullinan, or if in Delhi Arvind Kejriwal is filling petrol into his very old Wagoner, both get the benefit of the subsidy because it is non-targeted. It is petrol that has or enjoys the subsidy. It doesn't matter who is using it. You can be an ultra high net worth individual. You can be a below the poverty line individual filling petrol into a two-wheeler. Everybody enjoys the subsidy. This is non-targeted. Non-targeted subsidies are the absolute bane of economics. They should be reduced slowly and gradually and done away with. Targeted subsidies. If you give some help to people who hold only below poverty line, BPL ration cards, now you know that this kind of a help is going only to the poor people. That is a targeted subsidy. You give something only to senior citizens. There can be very rich senior citizens also. But if you say senior citizens holding BPL ration cards, and those ration cards are linked to Aadhaar, and using that there is a direct benefit transfer to their bank accounts. Now you are actually helping people who need help. I am a great supporter of targeted subsidies because targeted subsidies is what good governance is all about. It is non-targeted subsidies that distort the economic picture. And many times the recipients are people who do not need or deserve the benefits of the non-targeted subsidies. Let us also look at one targeted subsidy which has become a little controversial this year. And that is the famous Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act or scheme. Now this scheme ensures 100 days of employment to people registered under it. Wages differ from rupees 190 to rupees 309 per day depending upon the state that employs them. In the pandemic, the MGNREGA saved significant numbers of poor people from starvation because they at least got some money by working 100 days in a year and they were paid. In financial year 2020-21, that is the year most affected by the pandemic, the government had allotted rupees 1,10,527 crores to the scheme to combat the pandemic. But what Budget 2022 has done is, it has slashed the allocation to this scheme down to 72,035 crores. The revised estimates for financial year 2021-22 was 97,035. So here are the three figures. Financial year 2020-21, to address the ill effects of the pandemic, 1,10,000 and odd crores. Next year, the budget says the revised estimates for 2021-22, 97,000 crores. But now we go to the financial year 2022-23, the one that is to come. There only 72,000 crores have been allotted to the Mahatma Gandhi scheme, the Manrega as they call it. Now this is advanced as proof that Budget 2022 is anti-poor. Here is an example of a targeted subsidy, because people have to be registered to get that work, and generally they are poor people. All the people covered under this scheme are poor people. Everywhere there will be controversies. The latest controversy is that there are many non-existent Benami people also who have registered. But when you have a scheme that caters to millions of people, there will be these small little discrepancies, and that is for the government to identify and weed them out. By and large, there is no doubt that the Manrega has helped actually deserving poor people to especially stay alive in the tough 2 years that we have seen in the recent past. So the argument is that when you are slashing allocations to the Manrega, you are now slashing allocation not to a non-targeted subsidy, but to a targeted subsidy, and therefore this is anti-poor. But the truth may be something a little different. The government hopes that in financial year 2022-23, we will either see the end of the pandemic or manage it to the point that it will be no longer disrupt the economy. Expectations of better economic performance and the resulting creation of jobs justify a lower budget allocation to the MGNREGA. This is the government's stand. There is also financial headroom for more allocation to the MGNREGA should the situation demand. So on the one hand, you have an allegation that you are anti-poor because you have slashed down allocation here. On the other hand, the government is saying, no, we have done our homework. We expect the economic resilience that we saw in the present financial year of 2021-22 to continue into financial year 2022-23. Therefore, there will be more employment opportunities. In the budget, we have made huge allocation to infrastructure and other projects, which will result in a higher employment rate. We have done our homework. We have not abandoned the scheme. We have only reduced the allocation to the scheme after doing homework. Now, who is correct? Little difficult to say at this stage. Maybe we will have to wait out and see what history tells us. But we cannot dismiss the reduction in allocation here as simply an anti-poor measure. If the economy continues to do well, then there will be people getting benefit from this, but it will also spur people to look for more meaningful, perhaps better employment elsewhere. I now turn to economic growth, because one of the objectives of the budget is to foster and facilitate economic growth. The economic survey forecast a real GDP growth of 8 to 8.5% in the coming year. If we are actually able to achieve anything like this, riding on the back of the 9.2% that we saw here, we should be really happy. But the budget has assumed a nominal GDP growth of 11.1%. Now, what's the difference between nominal GDP growth and real GDP growth? The difference is the inflation rate. So is the government assuming inflation of just 2.6 to 3.1%? I would find it hard to believe. On the one hand, we have rising crude prices. On the other hand, we have the threat of inflation. One of the reasons that will stoke inflation is the government's massive borrowing programs. So this also once again shows that the figures are a little suspect. If the budget is saying 11.1% nominal GDP and the economic survey announced just one day before the budget is saying our forecast is a real GDP growth of 8 to 8.5%. So is the difference only 2.6 to 3.1%? Or is the government fearing a much lower real GDP growth than the economic survey forecast? This is a little disturbing. If the real GDP growth is substantially less than 8%, if it is 5% or 6%, then a lot of the government's calculations, including control of the fiscal deficit, may go wrong. Because always remember, the fiscal deficit is expressed as a percentage of GDP. The really big announcement on the Economic Growth Fund has been the huge bet of the government on infrastructure. As this cover page of India Today discloses, the Hindu business line, the Daily, called it Capex Carnival. Capital expenditure up by 25% to a record rupees 7.5 lakh crores. Viewed from any angle, this is a significant number. This capex push can work wonders for growth and job creation if projects are identified carefully and implemented without a hitch. This kind of spending on capital expenditure, on creating assets, on creating infrastructure, this can lead to not just a better economy, but badly needed jobs, especially for young people. And probably because of this kind of an initiative on the capital expenditure front, the government has slashed allocation to things like the Manrega. The problem is, if you see the last 2 or 3 lines on this slide, the caveat is all these good things will happen if projects are identified carefully and implemented without a hitch. This will work only if India can find a vaccine for its one hitherto incurable virus, pathetically poor implementation. Our history of implementation, our track record has been of inertia, delays, multi-level leakages, and poor outcomes. If we cannot overcome this, much of this huge money that is being poured down the drain there will be wasted. Now, so far we have been talking about a better economic picture because of massive capital expenditure. There are other ways to foster economic growth. Economic growth can be fostered not just by dumping money. It can be fostered, it can be encouraged by better policy. And here is where the government many times fails. One example, I call it the unease of doing business. The government is very, very fond of talking about ease of doing business. Really, let's look at another picture here. According to a report called Jailed for Doing Business, this is by 2 organizations, including a famous organization called Observer Research Foundation, or ORF, which is an independent think tank. According to this report, there are 26,134 imprisonment clauses in India's business laws. Non-compliance with 2 out of 5 provisions for doing business can send an entrepreneur to jail. Are we criminalizing business? Are we constantly making the threat of imprisonment, the threat of criminality, hang over the heads of business people. It is business people who give dynamism to the economy, who generate employment, who take the pressure off employment, because when somebody is successful in business, they are not going to go looking for jobs. To that extent, the need for job creation is less. In fact, they will create jobs. But is this the way we treat business people? This is something that should worry the government. And simple measures, simple policy measures here would free businesses. And the moment businesses are free and they begin doing well, their profits increase and the government's taxes increase. The government here is actually killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. No wonder Nani Palkiwala lamented, every company director in India wakes up each morning to find himself a criminal. If God himself came down to India and tried to start a business, I don't think he would be able to comply with all laws. The laws are designed to ensure that there's no human being alive who can comply with all of them. Why? Because that is where corruption is generated. That is where speed money is paid in order to escape from criminal liability. This kind of policy making is truly pathetic. It speaks of extremely poor governance. And I wish, instead of just looking at financial figures, the government would also look at policy areas where it can improve. Let's now move to personal income tax. There are no changes in income tax rates. The middle class was crying out for relief. There is no relief. The surcharge and cess raj continues. But it would be best to tone down expectations of lower taxes from this point on. The government is finding that if it hikes the basic exemption, immediately gigantic numbers of tax SSCs will go out of the tax net. The government does not want this. The government is clear about expanding the tax base. They want more taxpayers. The importance of taxes in the government's total receipts is steadily increasing. Let's look at the total receipts of the government in this pie chart. Let's start with the segment on the top right of this circle, the dark blue. Corporation tax or corporate income tax is contributing 15 paise in a rupee of government's total receipts. Then you have income tax, including personal income tax. That is contributing 15 paise. So corporate income tax, personal and non-corporate income tax like partnership firms, others, we have got 30 paise in a rupees coming only from these two. Now, if you look at the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 segments, customs, union excise duties, GST, and the next 4, that is customs, excise duties, and GST, those 3 segments, there you have another 5%, 7%, 16%. This segment, starting with corporate income tax, ending with GST, is the contribution of various kinds of taxes to the government's total receipts. And if you do the math there, 30, 42, 58% of the government's receipts are coming from taxes. Non-debt capital receipts, non-tax revenue, these total is only 7%. And that huge gap of 35% that you see, that is coming from borrowings and other liabilities. That is the fiscal deficit. So the government knows that but for taxes, its ability to earn is almost non-existent. So it is going to make every effort to see that more and more taxes are collected. And that is why I said it would probably be a good idea to stop wishing and hoping for more and more tax sops as we go along. Quickly to look at some of the aspects of income tax. There have been so many volunteer disclosure income schemes in India. And one small new avatar has been given in the 2022 budget also. The budget gives a one-time window to taxpayers to correct discrepancies and omissions in tax returns within 2 years of filing, subject to the payment of taxes. One more opportunity is given. The government may use terms like updating, correction. It is nothing but one more attempt or one more opportunity given to people to come clean. In faceless assessments, hitherto there was a clause. It was discretionary for the income tax department to grant personal hearing to taxpayers, even if the taxpayers requested it. There are some matters where faceless assessment may work in simple matters, but there are complicated matters where either the chartered accountant or the SSC must or will be best in a position to explain things to the income tax department only during a personal hearing, just as no lawyers will ever agree for perpetual faceless hearings in courts. They will want to come to the court and address the judge because they believe that that is the best way of convincing someone when you are arguing a case. But unfortunately, when this whole thing of faceless assessments was introduced, the discretion was given to the income tax department to grant personal hearing. Budget 2022 has done some excellent work here. It is now mandatory for the tax authorities to grant personal hearing through video calls or video conferencing if taxpayers demand it. Faceless assessment can work at a lower level, not at a higher level. At a higher level, if you try to work, it becomes brainless assessment, not faceless assessment. So I'm very happy about this clause. On property transactions, on TDS, there has been a change. TDS at the rate of 1% on property transactions in excess of rupees 50 lakhs will now be on the consideration or the stamp duty value, whichever is higher. Formerly, it was only on the consideration. Now, consideration or stamp duty value. Now, the most significant change in this budget is the change in the long-term capital gains tax surcharge. Let's look at that. Surcharge on long-term capital gains on all assets is now capped at a maximum of 15%. Earlier, only long-term capital gains on listed shares enjoyed this cap on the surcharge. LTCG tax thus gets reduced from a maximum of 28.5%, that is 20% plus maximum 37% surcharge plus 4% education cess on income of over rupees 5 crores. From that maximum figure of 28.5%, it now gets reduced to 23.92%, that is 20% plus 15% surcharge plus 4% education cess. 2 points. One, this reduction in surcharge and uniformity is on all assets, not just financial assets, even physical assets like gold or real estate. So there is now a uniform cap on the surcharge on long-term capital gains tax. This is welcome. Second point, you can ask me a question. Why am I spending time on giving this example on income that is more than 5 crore rupees per year? Very few of us will be earning that kind of income. But you have to remember one thing. A lot of us will be holding some piece of real estate. It might be inherited, bought, whatever it is. And very often, even in a reasonably big city of the country, not necessarily in a metro, any small property also, 10, 20, 30 cents, if it's in a reasonably good location, can easily be 5 to 10 crore rupees in value. In the year you sell it, you may have, once the long-term capital gains is calculated, you may have an income more than 5 crores. where the surcharge kicks in. And there you have got some relief. On COVID compensation, there is a very good move by the government. Budget 2022 clarifies that any sum of money up to rupees 10 lakhs received by an individual from any person in respect of any expenditure actually incurred on medical treatment of self and family members, in respect of any illness related to COVID-19 subject to some conditions, shall not be considered as income. It's quite unbecoming of the government to have such a broad definition. Any sum of money received from any person, any expenditure related to self and family members, subject to any illness, need not be only COVID-19, any COVID-19 related illness. There, of course, there are some conditions. This kind of compensation that people have received will not be considered as income. This is very definitely a welcome move, because I know people, from what I know personally from personal experience, there are people who have incurred anything as low as 30,000 rupees for hospitalization treatment, right up to 3 lakh rupees for the treatment of COVID. And this can be a very, very huge hit on a person's, on a family's resources, especially middle class, lower middle class. People will find it very difficult. And what if more than one person in the family had this kind of an illness? So here, even if you have got it from insurance, even if you have got it from your employer, you got it from any other person, it will not be treated as income. That is a very good move. And the other part of it, Budget 2022 also stipulates that this provision is applicable retrospectively from 1st April 2020. So 2021, 21-22, and now the budget is saying 22-23. In all these 3 years, all COVID compensation is not going to be taxable. And this is probably one of the very few cases of retrospective taxation that nobody is going to have a problem with. We now go to the most entertaining part of the budget. Entertaining is, if you're like me, you're not into cryptocurrencies, then it's very entertaining. Cryptocurrencies to be taxed. I'll start with this cartoon, which is, of course, once again in lighter vein. Virtual digital assets. That is the government's terminology for a lot of assets, including cryptocurrencies, are to be taxed at 30% flat. No slabs here. Crypto gains will be taxed even if the total income of the SSC falls in the basic exemption limit or is eligible for a rebate. So no mercy. Even if you have very low income but you have crypto gains, you have to pay the tax on the crypto gains. Losses on cryptocurrency trading cannot be set off against gains from any other income. No set off available. Losses cannot be carried forward to subsequent financial years. So a very harsh, a very restrictive, a very punishing, punitive tax is going to be imposed on cryptocurrencies from the next financial year. And there's more. No indexation benefits when calculating long-term capital gains tax. Seller has to part with TDS of 1%. Now, any TDS can be adjusted against the final tax liability or can be claimed as refund, but that is later. First, you have to block it. So, your liquidity will be locked up. Traders in cryptocurrency are likely to be hit because even any locking up of liquidity will result in a problem for them. Then there is tax deduction at source, TDS, 1% on cryptocurrency gifts, and recipients of gifts will be taxed at 30% of the value on the date of the gift. So, merciless taxation, merciless provisions. 30% tax on cryptocurrency profits is only the base rate. With surcharge and cess, the actual tax rate can go right up to 42.74%. GST will be charged on the commissions of crypto trading platforms and service providers. GST will also be charged on crypto mining. We will have to wait for detailed regulations and circulars for greater clarity. These are the main provisions that I have understood there, but there'll be a lot of circulars, lot of clarifications, lot of regulations that are going to come. But you can be sure that they will be along these same lines. The bottom line is that cryptocurrencies are going to be taxed and taxed heavily. As this cartoon suggests, a lot of people who are already into cryptos will have to do a rethink. And as the taxation system rolls out, we'll have to really consider whether it will be worth continuing to trade in cryptocurrencies. Now, coming to the legality part of cryptocurrencies, that too is very interesting. Taxing cryptocurrencies does not establish or endorse their legality. This is because the Income Tax Act seeks to tax all income, regardless of whether it arises from activities that are legal or illegal. If there is an income, it will be taxed, period. Legal, illegal is for other authorities, investigative authorities, the courts, police, for them to worry about. But the government itself can't seem to decide whether cryptos are legal or not. The finance minister said she is not going into the legality of cryptos, only their taxability. But on Saturday, 5th February 2022, in a discussion organized by the Hindu Business Line, P.V. Somanathan, Finance Secretary, publicly asserted that cryptocurrencies are legal, unregulated, and taxable. Legal, unregulated, and taxable. These were his exact words. Until something is declared illegal and unless it violates a domestic law, it is legal. So crypto is legal today. This is what the Finance Secretary said. Anyway, time will tell. The fact remains now that we have a tax on them. Legality is under a bit of a cloud. Non-fungible tokens. Non-fungible tokens, NFTs, will also be taxed like cryptos. I know there are a lot of people who have absolutely no idea about what NFTs are. My own knowledge in these areas is a little gray, but in the Economic Times, I found a few sentences that in a very simple language tell you what non-fungible tokens are, and I have reproduced them here. An NFT is a unit of data which is stored on a digital ledger, also called a blockchain, and can be sold and traded. Some kind of electronic data that is stored and can be traded. NFT data units may be digital files such as photos, videos, and audio. Each NFT may represent a different underlying asset and can have a different value. NFT ledgers claim to provide a public certificate of authenticity or proof of ownership. Digital art is currently the most common use of the NFT. For non-celebrities, making money out of NFTs is incredibly costly and difficult. Much of what surrounds NFTs is hype. I know ordinary people with a reasonable amount of talent in art or graphic design or something else who have tried to convert their works of art into NFTs and see whether they can make some money of them. Actually, they end up losing money. Why? See, if you're not a celebrity, then you have to engage certain organizations who will try to popularize your work of art which you are converting to an NFT. And they will not do it free. There can be pretty serious money to be paid. And their fees have a very interesting term. Their fees are called gas. So instead of earning money, you may find your own money going up in gas. And if you see the bullet point there, most of what surrounds NFTs is hype. The hype is the advertisements of these various organizations and firms and individuals who try to entice people by promising them riches if they convert some of their artwork or other work into NFTs. In the process, the money will be taken from them for fees, and you are not at all sure about whether your NFT will be a success, whether it will be auctioned at a good price, whether you'll even recover the gas that you paid. For normal people, therefore, NFTs should probably stand for non-fungible trash. Anything masquerading as currency, which is not issued by the Central Bank of India or a foreign nation, will be deemed as crypto for taxation. This tax will be effective from financial year 2022-23 onwards. The government has quite rightly taxed cryptocurrency profits on par with profits on betting and gambling. If you ask my personal opinion, I'm very happy about this tax because I believe that dabbling in cryptocurrencies, and that's the correct term, dabbling, is nothing but gambling, because I believe that cryptocurrencies do not have any underlying value. I'll give you my opinion about cryptocurrencies and then you can take your own decision. I start with the famous comedian John Oliver. He says, cryptocurrencies are everything you don't understand about money combined with everything you don't understand about computers. The Economist, one of the most respected publications in the world, in its 18th September 2021 edition, has a few beautiful paragraphs about cryptocurrencies which all of us would do well to heed. I have reproduced them here. One worry that worries about cryptocurrencies is the lack of an external anchor of value. Cryptocurrencies are no different from the dollar in that they rely on people having a shared expectation of their utility. You have your rupee, you have your dollar. You know what to expect, you know what it can achieve or do as a currency. However, conventional money is also backed by states with a monopoly on force and central banks that are lenders of the last resort. In this particular sentence, you have the difference between a currency and a cryptocurrency, because a currency is backed by the state. You take your 500 rupee note. If you actually verify what it is a piece of paper that is close to worthless. But it is not worthless because on it there is a signature and a promise. The promise is to pay the bearer the sum of 500 rupees, and the signature is that of the governor of the Reserve Bank of India. And the Reserve Bank of India is the country's most important financial institution. It is completely backed by the sovereign, which is the government of India. And it is a sovereign that has a monopoly on force, on enforcement at various levels, on running laws, on running the courts. So you have here something like a sovereign bearer bond. That's all it is in the ultimate analysis. The currency note. Cryptocurrencies do not have this external anchor of value. No central bank will act as a lender of last resort in case something goes wrong there. So to continue with this passage from The Economist, without these, DeFi, decentralized finance will be vulnerable to panics. Contract enforcement outside the virtual world is also a concern. A blockchain contract may say you own a house, but only the police can enforce an eviction. So we would perhaps be wise to heed these eminently sensible words from the economist. In any case, I am happy that the crypto free lunch is over. India has an estimated 7 crore demat accounts, 12 crore mutual fund portfolios, 10 crore owners of cryptocurrencies. Greed, a get-rich-quick culture, and easy money have fueled the craze for gambling in cryptocurrencies and other fads. When easy money comes to an end, I would be very interested in knowing what's going to happen to crypto prices. Until the cryptocurrency law is enacted, punters will continue to dabble in it. But, and there is a very big but, I find that amazingly, a lot of cryptocurrency traders believe that cryptocurrencies are going to be taxed only from the 1st of April 2022. That means in these months of February and March, we can do what we like. Please understand that if you earn an income from cryptocurrency even now, it is not tax-free. Because under the Income Tax Act, every income is taxed unless the government declares it to be tax-free. This is a point not understood by many. What the budget 2022 has only done is, they have told you how and at what rate it is going to be taxed from the 1st of April onwards. That does not mean that if you have made millions in cryptocurrencies in this financial year, that escapes tax. I'm afraid not. It does not. So, those of you who have made some gains in cryptocurrencies would do well to consult a chartered accountant and be on the right side of the income tax law even now. It's only the rates of income tax and all the other peripheral issues that have been clarified. It does not mean that they have escaped tax right now. I will end with this, one of my favorite cartoons about cryptocurrencies. We will now turn to some of the other aspects of Budget 2022, some of the economic aspects. We'll start with agriculture. Budget 2022 adopts a three-pronged approach to agriculture. For the first time, we are seeing a scientific vision where agriculture is concerned. It's very interesting to understand this. What are these three prongs? Number one, you have the farmers who give us what we call our daily bread. That is the farmers who grow staple food. And in India, for that matter, even in a good deal of other countries, today rice or paddy and wheat are the two major staples. Now, many times growing these is a thankless job, many times an unprofitable job. But all of us depend on these staples for our survival. What is the concern of the poor farmers who grow these crops? Their concern is price. They should be able to sell their crops at a reasonable price. That has been taken care of in Budget 22 by giving a higher outlay for procurement prices, what we call the minimum support price. So there will be a minimum support price at which farmers will be able to sell their grains. So this should set at rest their fears. This is the first point. Now, which are the other 2 points? Second, growing demand for high-value food products offers farmers an opportunity to increase their incomes. Farmers should not remain at that low level of only rice and paddy. Can they move to a slightly higher value? Can they move up the value chain? There is a demand these days. There's a growing demand for high value food products as the Indian middle class increases, as people's incomes increase. There is also the possibility of export. Exports of agricultural products are an imperative. We have to explore these avenues for our farmers so that they can get better prices, so that they can diversify their crops more. The domestic market alone is unlikely to absorb expanding production without a downward pressure on prices. If we rely only on the domestic market, many times there are surplus food grains produced. They are dumped by farmers at terrible prices. So these are the three areas. One is support, a minimum support price for the staple foods. Second is look to move up the value chain. Can farmers also diversify a little, grow some crops which are high value and likely to fetch better prices? Three, a supplement of number two, can we also export, especially high value grains? These are the concerns. Now, to capitalize on these new dynamics, farmers need to do a few things. They need to diversify their crops. They need to access new knowledge and expertise in crop management to supplement conventional practices. Budget 2022 has done some good work here. It has announced measures to encourage millets, oilseeds, vegetables, fruits, shrimp farming, etc. All these can help agriculturists to move up in value. There is also a boost to chemical-free farming, organic farming, and an effort to harness the benefits of technology, including the use of drones for a higher and better agricultural output. In the advanced countries, the correct use of drones helps to detect a lot of dangers to crops, from shade to disease to certain areas which are suitable, certain areas which are not suitable. It also keeps an eye on the very crops that are grown and gives constant data feedback to scientists as well as farmers. And the benefits of this kind of surveillance has been already experienced in the advanced countries. And a lot of these drones not being very expensive, we don't see any reason why their benefits cannot be utilized and exploited by Indian agriculturists also. Now, these efforts by the government are very definitely laudable. Many people argue that agriculturists cannot absorb and exploit technology. This is absolutely wrong. Anybody who is properly incentivized will absorb technology. People said that in the early use of cell phones. People said, no, rural people will not do it. Today, sometimes they use cell phones with more common sense than people in urban areas. So let us not think that agriculturists cannot absorb and make use of these kind of technologies. If they are shown how these can improve their life, improve their finances, improve their crops, improve their profitability, and lead them to an overall better life, very definitely they will accept and absorb these changes. And here, there is a role for private enterprise also. With suitable regulation in place, private enterprise can work with agriculturists in these areas. If you take them into confidence, build up their confidence, and show them the benefits before passing laws, then we will not have the kind of situations we had in the farm law fiascos. Anybody who studied the farm laws know that those farm laws were progressive. The problem was in the hurried and rather autocratic implementation, which raised the hackles of farmers, which made them suspicious, and which made them agitate successfully. The second area that I would like to look at the macro level, is logistics and coordination. Very, very important in a vast country like India. There is an initiative or a program called the PM Gati Shakti Yojana, the Prime Minister Gati Shakti Yojana, which was launched in October 2021. This is a digital platform that aims to bring 16 ministries, including railways and roadways, together for integrated planning and coordinated implementation of infrastructure connectivity projects. Many times we grumble about how the government works in totally uncoordinated ways. A beautiful concrete road is laid. 2 months later, somebody is cutting through that concrete, digging up things. All of us have experienced these kind of occurrences. There's a lot of waste there. Where the government fails is in coordination. Now, at least at the macro level, there is a vision to bring about a coordination, and as you can see, it's a Herculean task. 16 ministries, and most of those ministries have a say in logistics. In Budget 2022, the Finance Minister announced that under the PM Gati Shakti Master Plan, 100 cargo terminals will be developed during the next 3 years. The plan aims for integrated and seamless connectivity for the movement of people, goods, and services from one mode of transport to another, including last mile connectivity for travel and transport. As a vision statement, this is beautiful, and if it can really be done, it will sort out a lot of logistics problems that we face in India, especially in the rural areas. The aim of the PMGSY is to have a transformative plan for economic growth and sustainable development. It involves 7 engines: roads, railways, airports, ports, mass transport, waterways, and logistics infrastructure. It's a praiseworthy attempt and effort, even if the work ahead is daunting. Coming to communications and technology, the major announcement in the budget is 5G. The timeline for conducting the 5G spectrum auction is sometime during financial year 2022-23. If successfully implemented, 5G can deliver internet speeds that are 10 times faster than 4G and improvement of 10 times in latency, the time difference between sending and receiving messages. 5G can address issues like voice call drops, which all of us are suffering from, interrupted data services, which also we have experienced repeatedly, inadequate optical fiber infrastructure. But the auction will have to be conducted carefully. All of us know the experiences of the Indian government in the past in auctioning spectrum. Barring Reliance Jio, the other operators may find it hard to cough up the rupees 1 lakh crores required to buy 5G spectrum. The telecom regulator must balance spectrum price with the larger benefit of 5G-based broadband services to the country. There's a tightrope walk here. On the one hand, the government wants to earn the maximum money from the auction of 5G. On the other hand, if paying high prices recklessly is going to drive telecom companies into bankruptcy, as we have seen, who's going to suffer? The ultimate users of this kind of technology are going to suffer. Now, when all of us have got used to smartphones, to internet, to so many modern technological miracles, can we ever conceive of going back to an era where you didn't have these facilities? These have helped us in various ways. They have made life easy for those who know to use them responsibly and sensibly. So there has to be a balance here. It is not just recklessly collecting money. The government must ensure that after the auction, telecom companies are able to survive and move ahead with their businesses and give better and better services to our citizens. Now, one example of the importance and use of 5G is 5G can deliver a critical service such as telesurgery over a mobile network with unprecedented efficiency. 5G will also open the floodgates of innovative applications that require massive bandwidth. A lot of new services, a lot of new businesses can open up based on 5G. Where business is concerned, not much encouragement for business in this budget, but there is one scheme of the government called the ECLGS, Emergency Credit Line Guarantee Scheme. This was promulgated by the government to help medium and small scale businesses during the pandemic, and now it has been extended by 1 year till 31st of March 2023. Now the ECLGS will help close contact sectors such as hospitality, which were disrupted the most by COVID pandemic. Budget 2022 envisages an expanded credit guarantee scheme of rupees 5 lakh crores. ECLGS has provided much needed additional credit to more than 130 lakh MSMEs, that is micro, small and medium scale enterprises. This has helped them mitigate the adverse impact of the pandemic. Essentially, what the government is saying is, if the banks and the lending institutions advance money for those micro, medium and small enterprises that are eligible for the ECLGS, in case they default on their loans later given under ECLGS, the government will stand guarantee and see that those loans are repaid. A good move. And while we are likely to slowly learn to deal with the pandemic in a much better way in the coming financial year, I am happy that this scheme has been extended by 1 more year so that businesses have a chance. Businesses need time to come out of the ill effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I now come to a conclusion of this budget analysis. And when I look at the conclusion, I will do this conclusion in 3 brief parts. One is the budget positives. Second, what hopes do we have out of this budget? And third also, what are the budget fears? Let's start with the positives. The first is no populist announcements and no measures aimed at particular constituencies. And very definitely I appreciate this because the budget has been announced just as we are having certain crucial state government elections. Despite this, the government has been careful not to wreck the fiscal picture by these kind of populist giveaways. The central themes of the budget are 2: heavy investment in infrastructure and development. No one can argue with these themes. Projections of revenue and expenditure are conservative. The objective appears to be to underpromise and overdeliver. Once again, if the government wants to be a little conservative in its fiscal accounting, if it wants to underpromise, overdeliver, well, I myself come from a very conservative school of investment professionals, and I can't argue with these objectives of the government if these are indeed the objectives. What are my hopes for the budget? The willingness to tackle non-targeted subsidies is welcome. It's a welcome step in fiscal prudence. And I hope we slowly give up our itch to tamper with economics, to distort economics. Budget 2022 was announced based upon an upswing in the economy in financial year 2021-22. It is reasonable to hope that the Indian economy will continue to do well in 22-23. But it would certainly be foolish to confidently prophesy anything. Predictions, prophecies generally will result in this particular fate. So let me not prophesy anything. We can only remain cautiously optimistic. It will also be a good idea to look at a few things that can go wrong. That's where I talk about budget fears. So what are the things that can go wrong? These are things or factors over which the government will have absolutely no control. The first is inflation. Inflation could spoil the party. Inflation can go up. It can go up because of oil prices, especially if there is going to be a war between Russia and Ukraine, and oil prices, they have already risen in anticipation. They can go up further. Fallout of rising US interest rates, including sustained selling by foreign portfolio investors. This is another danger. The United States Federal Reserve could raise interest rates several times during the calendar year 2022. And the dollar being the world's unofficial reserve currency, every time the dollar becomes more attractive to invest in because of the rising interest rates there, money from across the world, assets are liquidated, money flows back to the United States. We have seen this happening again and again. So in order for money to flow, the assets that people hold, investors hold in various other countries of the world, including developing countries like India, should be sold or liquidated. So that selling pressure could lead to a fall in the domestic stock market. And it will have a domino effect that could derail the disinvestment program also. If you're going to have a bad market, it is difficult to disinvest, it is difficult to come out with IPOs. So here you are seeing some of the important factors about which we should be concerned about, and some of these can spoil the government's balance sheet. Rising interest rates, which can adversely affect corporate profits and performance, resulting in lower direct and indirect tax collections. So everything is interconnected. There are a lot of risks that could take place. We hope, even if they do take place, they will not really distort or damage our overall economy. We hope for good things, but it is good to keep our eyes open. I will conclude by this concept of Pareto optimality, exactly how I concluded my last year's budget speech, because the two budgets resemble each other, the 2021 and the 2022 budgets. Pareto optimality is achieved when you have a situation where no one is worse off and some are better off. This has been managed by both Budget 2021 and Budget 2022. On the budgetary front, the government has dealt reasonably well with the last two difficult years. During COVID, in 2020-21, the government pumped in money into the system, did its best to keep liquidity going, and somehow the nation faced the crisis. But the final results of budgetary efforts will depend mainly upon implementation and outcomes. Failing that, it will be left as usual to the hard work, ingenuity, and efforts of the people of this country to keep its economic engines running. Thank you. In this presentation, I've been helped by a number of people. Three of my esteemed colleagues from my own office, Reggie Aranha, Disha Colaco, and Cyril Fernandez. And in bringing this presentation to you, I am indebted to three of my friends from the financial services industry: Mr. Deepak K. Rao, founder director of Simplus Financial Consultancy; Mr. Gavin Abner Pinto of the Simplus Learning Academy; and Mr. Lizal Aranha, an IT consultant who looks after our editing and presentation. I thank all of them, and I thank you for giving me a patient hearing in this budget analysis. Thanks again.